Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I'm very glad to make a contribution to this debate, which is prompted by the latest animal welfare crisis brought to us by the live sheep animal export trade. And I thank the member for Clark for bringing it forward. I acknowledge the consistency of his interest in animal welfare. The motion goes to two matters. It goes to the crisis involving the MV Bahija, which still sits off the coast of Fremantle, and it goes to the challenge of managing the end of what it has been for a long time a marginal, unnecessary and inherently harmful trade, the live sheep export industry. So right now, as the member for Clark has noted, there's more than 10,000, 12,000, 13,000 sheep and some few thousand cattle on board the MV Bahija, which was approved to travel to Jordan via the Red Sea. The exporter themselves made a decision that that wasn't viable. The contingency plan that they had in place then wasn't viable either, and as a result of that, they were forced to come back to Western Australia. Those animals have been on that vessel now for 33 days. They were on that vessel in heatwave conditions last week. In a few days' time, Perth will experience 40-degree temperatures again, apparently, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday. The longest live sheep voyage to the Middle East in calendar year 2022 was for 23 days. The length of confinement aboard these vessels is a matter of animal welfare, and every sensible person in every part of this House knows that. We have rules for how long animals can be confined in lots of circumstances, how long they can be confined on trucks, and we rightly ascribe animal welfare impacts to the confinement of animals on metal ships at sea, sometimes forced to stand in their own waste, always forced to endure the motion of the ships, and the other impacts, including heat stress. People over there talk about mortality. People on the other side talk about whether or not animals put on weight. I tell you what, human beings on death row put on weight. You're not going to tell me that whether or not a living creature that is provided a huge amount of food, the fact that it puts on weight is the only measure of whether or not that animal is suffering. You're not going to tell me that having animals on a metal ship, animals that have spent their entire lives and of course their existence as a species on land, enjoy being on stinking metal ships for weeks at a time. They do not. And all of the evidence about heat stress and other measures of animal welfare show that animals suffer in those conditions. They have been on that ship for 33 days. That's already 10 days longer than the longest voyage in 2022, and the proposition from the exporters was that they would be re-exported for a voyage that would probably take another 33 days. That would have made it the longest voyage of its kind in Australia's history, and on previous occasions when voyages of that duration have been attempted, we have seen animal welfare atrocities. That is the nature of this trade. So it's very welcome that the independent regulator has made the decision to not approve the further re-export of those animals, and the best course now is for them to come off the ship as soon as possible, for them to come off the ship and no longer suffer from those conditions. The second issue that the member for Clark raises is about the sensible, long-awaited transition out of the trade altogether. And just to pick up what the member for North Sydney said, I mean, it's just not fair or true to say that the government has done nothing. We committed to phasing out of this trade. That should have been done responsibly a long time ago by the former government. We've committed to doing it, and within weeks of the election, the Minister for Agriculture came to Western Australia and began the proper process to transitioning out. He began the meetings, he established the independent panel. The independent panel did its proper consultative work. They've now provided a report to the minister, and of course we expect in due course that the minister will come forward with both a plan and a timetable to properly and responsibly transition out of a trade that is marginal, unnecessary, and has always been inherently harmful. Nobody on that side can say it's not been harmful when they themselves put a moratorium in place to stop the trade during the course of the northern summer, when their own McCarthy review said that every time ships went during that period, unacceptable animal heat stress occurred. So they implemented the summer moratorium. Until they implemented the summer moratorium, of course, for year after year after year after year, Australian animals had been subject to confinement and unacceptable heat stress as determined by the review and the response to the review that they implemented. So all of this rubbish about mortality and animals putting on weight, they know and farmers know is rubbish. Those animals suffer, the suffering is intolerable, the Australian community won't accept it. And in Western Australia, 70% of people in metropolitan Australia and 69% of people in rural and regional Western Australia want to see the trade come to an end. It is marginal. People have trouble with the word marginal. How else would you describe an industry that is described by has declined by more than 90% from its peak? How else would you describe that industry? It's worth less than 1% of WA agricultural exports, as the member for Clark said, less than 0.1% of Australia's agricultural exports as a whole, less than 2% of sheep meat exports. It is not necessary. All the fear-mongering about what would happen through the decline and ultimately the end of this trade has failed to come true. Between 2013 and 2023, that 10-year period alone, when the industry declined by more than 75%, the sheep flock in Western Australia remained exactly the same, 14 million sheep. There was no decline in the West Australian sheep flock when the live sheep trade declined by 3/4. Wool production out of Western Australia in that same period, measure it in 2013, measure it in 2023. It did not decline at all over that period, despite a 75% decline in the live sheep export trade. So all of this, the roof is going to fall in. All of this, it's an essential trade. All of this, we can never see this trade disappear, has failed to manifest in any of the ways in which people who support the industry claim that it will. No diminution in the size of the Western Australian sheep flock, no diminution in the quantity of wool exported, and no noticeable difference economically in jobs or other broader economic impacts to the Western Australian industry. And in fact, in 2021, Western Australian wheat sheep farms were noted as the most profitable farms of their kind on the globe. And that was after this industry had already diminished by up to 85%. So we are doing the responsible thing by managing out of an industry that is virtually defunct and that has produced animal welfare harm and, in some cases, acute animal welfare disasters over and over again. Unfortunately, for the previous 9 years, despite all those things all those facts staring those opposite in the face, they did nothing. In fact, they made it worse. They reduced animal welfare regulation and they turned a blind eye, and they were an apologist for some of the exporters and their outcomes. Not everyone on the other side, though, Deputy Speaker, not everyone. Because the Deputy Liberal leader, the member for Farrer in 2018, of course, brought a private member's bill to end the live sheep trade, and it was supported by the member for Latrobe and by the then member for Corangamite, who is now Senator Henderson in the other place. And at that time, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party said that the live sheep trade is, and I quote, a trade in terminal decline. The member for Farrer said the live sheep trade is an operating model built on the suffering of animals. The Deputy Leader said, I think this trade in sheep is a shame and a stain on our international reputation. And the current Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, the member for Farrer, said, one thing I've learned from being in Parliament for 17 years is when you believe you need to do something, you must do it and never take a backward step. Well, Deputy Speaker, we know that this is a marginal and unnecessary and inherently harmful trade. All Australians know that. All of the scientific and economic evidence shows that. We change our practices in this country in respect of our high quality and high output and high value agricultural sector as we learn and as we improve. There have been other aspects of primary production which is of enormous value to this country that have changed and improved over time, and we can pick many of them. You know, we don't get eggs from battery hens anymore because we recognise that that was intolerably cruel. We don't need the live sheep trade. We are managing the end of that trade, but we're doing it in a responsible way. So I hear what the member for Clark is calling for. I want those animals to come off the MB Bahajah tomorrow. That is for the exporter to determine in consultation with the independent regulator quite properly. And I want to see the sensible end of the live sheep export trade as soon as possible. That's what we committed to. That's what the Albanese Labor government is delivering. That's what the Minister for Agriculture is working on.